Paris. Now, joining me from Rome is correspondent Seema Gupta and also Professor Lorenzo Castellani, an Italian politics specialist at Lewis University. Thanks to both of you. Firstly, Seema, this meeting comes after months of tensions between these two European neighbours, with a lot of concern being expressed here in Paris about the fact that Italy has a far-right government.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is really her first official visit and meeting with the French president. They've met on the sidelines at other summits and so on. But this is the first time she's going to be going to Paris. And really, right from the start, from when she took office back in about September 2022, already you had the French Minister of Europe at the time talking about France being attentive, that there will be a respect for European values on the part of Italy. Because, of course, as you mentioned, this is the first far-right government, coalition government here in Italy, the most far-right since World War II. And it's in stark contrast, perhaps, to Mr. Macron, more centrist positions in politics. And at that time, Ms. Meloni said such statements was unacceptable. And then it was very clear that things got off to not exactly the smoothest of starts, particularly on the issue of migration. In November, just a few months after her election, there was a standoff over the Ocean Viking migrant rescue ship when Italy decided not to take in the ship on Italian shores. Some 230 migrants were on board, and in the end, France was forced to take those migrants in. Frustrated with that, France decided to suspend its program to take in its obligation to relocate some 3,000 or so refugees. At that time, Ms. Meloni called such a move aggressive and unjustifiable. And these terms continued later on, because in May of this year, you had France's interior minister saying that the government of Ms. Meloni is incapable of dealing with the issue of migration. Such was the reaction to that statement that then the Italian foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, decided to cancel his scheduled trip to Paris, saying that these insults were unacceptable. So really, lots of words being exchanged on both sides. But we've seen some thawing on those issues, particularly with the fact that the Italian president visited France earlier this month. And now, of course, Ms. Meloni herself, the Prime Minister, will be meeting with President Macron.
Professor Castellani, given what Seema has just been saying, what do you expect to come out of this meeting here in Paris?
Well, first of all, we know that there are some common interests related particularly to the finance, financial rules in Europe that are discussed, particularly around the Stability Pact. So on this point, there could be a convergence. And as well, in terms of migration, the position of the two governments are not so far as they seem. Both of them aim to basically regulate migration and to have a better management of fluxes of illegal migrants. So despite these frictions that you well described, what we might expect is that on the European sides, European issues, there could be more cooperation. Far more difficult on the other side is the implementation of the Quirinale Treaty signed between Italy and France, because there's not so much trust by Meloni government on a further integration of the two countries in terms of political administrative cooperation and as well in terms of industrial manufacturing. What we can expect, because the things are going well between the two countries, growing integration concerning defense and position within NATO, where the two governments are perfectly on the same sides in supporting Ukraine.
Seema, who called for this meeting first? Was it Paris or Rome?
Well,
what we do know is that Ms. Meloni is actually Ms. Meloni is actually traveling to Paris, in fact, to participate in a conference on the International Bureau of Exposition. Now, that's the conference of parties, if you like, that will be deciding who will be holding the World Expo in 2030. And Rome has a bid for that. And Ms. Meloni is actually traveling for that purpose. Other world leaders are also traveling to Paris for that particular instance. But I think this question of a meeting meeting officially on the grounds at the Elysee Palace are very much something that perhaps Rome and Paris are looking forward to organizing, considering they are hoping to press on the commonalities, working together on Ukraine, as we've already heard, but also perhaps finding some commonalities on that Quirinale Treaty, a treaty that was signed with Mr. Macron and Ms. Meloni's predecessor, Mario Draghi. So really not her in particular, but all eyes on this meeting also, just to see how things are going between the two sides, despite the fact that we've seen all these issues and points of contention in the last few months since Meloni became Prime Minister.
And Professor Castellani, again, with Seema saying there that, there's been so much fractious tension between these two countries. In your opinion, will there be enough goodwill on both sides wanting to seek common ground?
Well, I think that it's until now, there was a sort of diplomatic trap between two countries which are allied, but at the same time, they are also competing each other on different fronts. So what we will test today is the political capacity of both Macron and Meloni to deal on a common ground. And for my perspective, European issues as migration or fiscal rules, or as well NATO support and development, these are all possible issues on which the two head of governments could have a common ground and could find common solution. Much more difficult from the perspective of Rome is further integration, also in terms of merging acquisition and as well industrial strategy concerning, industrial manufacturing and finance. We know that the two countries have strong ties in this sector, but the resurgence of protectionism and nationalism made more difficult to look for a common ground and a common development. And the same could be in terms of integration of public administration or diplomacy. So being realist, what is possible to have as an outcome of this meeting is a stronger cooperation on foreign policy and European Union issues, while the rest could remain, very cold in terms of bilateral relationship.
Seema, finally, just explain to me the importance of this bilateral treaty between these two neighbours.
Well, the Quirinale Treaty, which was signed by Macron with Meloni's predecessor, Mario Draghi, in 2021, it was really about restarting the connection between France and Italy. France already has such an agreement with Germany. And I think Mr. Macron, for his part, wanted to restart a close connection between these two countries, these two neighbours, important founding members of the European Union, and to get things off onto a better start. Mr. Macron often sees himself as taking a more European stance, a more centrist approach. One might say Ms. Meloni, for her part, representing a more far-right government, perhaps would not. But what we've seen since coming into power as Prime Minister, she has displayed a strong desire to function well within the system of the European Union. And as we heard the other guests mention, this meeting coming ahead of that European Council meeting later this month, it's a chance for them to perhaps get on the same page on those issues. And of course, that NATO summit in July as well. I think they are hoping to press on those commonalities. This meeting wasn't confirmed right in the beginning, but we got the confirmation from the Elysee that it was happening. So clearly, there is a desire to move forward on the Quirinale Treaty, to move forward within the European Union.
Seema Gupta, our Rome correspondent, and Professor Lorenzo Castellani, thank you so much.
Thank you.